Hello, BookTube. I thought we'd do another round of the page 112 tag. For those of you who haven't been keeping up with the sexy booktubers, that's a thing that Sean the Bookmaniac introduced us all to. Apparently there's a prize in France, leave it to the French, where the judges pick the items that are going to go onto the long list by judging only page 112 of each book, completely blind, nothing else. They don't know the author, they don't know how long the book is, they have no idea what kind of book it is, and they're not given any kind of context. They're just, you read page 112, and on the basis of what's going on there, you decide whether or not you want the book to move forward. The rationale being, as Sean points out in his introductory video, I don't think he was expecting me to like this as much as I did, but I do, and I'll get to why. But the rationale is that that novels, this is all novels that we've been doing so far, although a few of you have suggested in comments and via text that you want me to try this with nonfiction as well, and I'm all on board for that. I will certainly do it. But for now, the rationale is that with most novels, the first bits, the first few chapters are extensively worked over, and that's absolutely true, even by their own writers. A little bit of cross-eyed ennui sets in after a while of rereading it 18 million times. I used to know a novelist who would, when it was time to do extensive rounds with his draft, would read backwards. He would read his chapters backwards, specifically to combat that. I think it works in either way. The rationale here is that the beginning of a book will be extremely well manicured, and therefore might be deceptive. It might be that you get past that beginning, the part that the publisher's readers, the agents, everybody, the proofreaders, all lavish the most attention on, and all of a sudden, the quality drops off. So page 112 was chosen as far enough into the interior so that you're getting, so to speak, the real book. And I love the idea of it. The more I've thought about it, the more I've loved it. And the reason why, one of the reasons why, part of it is just fun, but one of the reasons why is because it's a tag, it's an exercise that forces you to think critically about what you're reading. You have to, because you don't have context. You don't have any kind of momentum whatsoever. So you have to, and you don't have any idea what's going on the page, so you have to judge it on its merits. You have to judge it on what's literarily happening in front of you, which is incredible, and which is the heart and soul of critical reading, is not necessarily never to give yourself to a book, but you have to know what it's doing at all times. It's a craft like any other. If you surrender the acknowledgement of that and just, float along on a stream, you're doing both yourself and the author a disservice, no matter whether either of you sees it or not. So I thought I have three novels here. We're going to go through on page 112 of each and see what we see. So this is the first one. Let's see here. Let's see here. Oh, it doesn't start, of course, at the beginning of the chapter. Curious and a bit timid, he looked across at his brother's son and thought, without being certain that he knew him, that's a proper-looking man. The younger Armstrong was not so happy. He didn't like the tenor of this story. Perhaps Goodyear, too, saw dodgy matter coming up. He swerved off into fantasy. The lady went walking in the woods and met a fox in a trap. She pitied it and set it free. Goodyear met Armstrong's eyes here and winked. Armstrong shook his head. Pretty well everyone in the room was aware that Armstrong was widely suspected of trapping foxes. Those who joined his army of beaters thought, fair enough, he's got a job to do. Those who spent their winter Saturdays following the hunt thought, that'll make the old bugger squirm. That fox, said Goodyear, was a fairy. As soon as it was freed, it licked its mangled foot, and the lady was amazed to see that the wound healed in a trice. And she was even more amazed when the creature sat back on its haunches and spoke to her, and its eyes looked as clever as any human's. The lady's disinterested kindness had earned her the fairy's goodwill. Her dearest wish would be granted. She wished, naturally, for a child. In Goodyear's version, the longed-for baby was a boy. There was no christening, and there was no spindle. The fox had told the lady that the little fellow was to eat no mushrooms. Everyone in those days gathered mushrooms in September, and most of them stuck to the usual ones with their pink gills and very good suppers they had. But some clever clogs, know-it-alls, said they could eat the yellow-frilled toadstools and the mauve-gray ones that looked like umbrellas and the ruddy-colored ones that looked like babies' ears, and every year they'd be smacking their lips and saying, "Exquisite, exquisite." And for every dozen of them, there'd be one who made a mistake and died of it. So when the fox said no mushrooms, the lady just thought it was wise advice. Okay. All right. So that's number one. And what do we get from that? Obviously, there's we're in the middle of a conversation with a group of people, and that mention of those who spent the winter Sundays following the hunt leads me to believe that we're in the company of wealthy people in England. And then it swerves into Jen Campbell territory with a fairy tale and ominous undertones to that fairy tale. So, all right, so that's number one. That was fairly well turned out. That was nice, solid prose. Now I'll do number two. Okay, so page 112 of number 2. Call Tubman. Rest is still recommended. That's in italics. An answer is being given to the quote, call Tubman. I will get up and I will do aerobic exercise. That is not recommended. Call Tubman. Calling. She snorts and waits for Tubman to pick up the call. It takes longer than with most people, partly because Tubman tends to leave his terminal off when he's working, and partly because, as a man who welds and solders, he distrusts haste. Hello? Tubman, I need your brain. Is that okay? She would have asked the witness and would have moved Tubman's meeting for her. Like her own, Tubman's working days belong to the system, with a capital S. And even if they didn't normally, this case was a very high priority score. Tubman wouldn't mind if she just loaded a preempt into the calendar and took as much of his time as she wanted, but that is exactly why she feels she has to ask. Always got time to play Watson for my favorite copper, he says. You know that. You're not busy? Tubman blows an actual raspberry. For God's sakes, Mayaliki, he says, don't be daft. Glad to help, but, he adds as she prepares another round of apology, don't waste any more breath being charming about it. I hate charm. And so she has to promise to come directly, which is what they both knew would happen. A moment later, her terminal opens a sidebar, and she can watch his schedule emptying for the rest of the morning. Each cancellation makes a noise like a very polite burp. In place of the various color codes, delivery, maintenance, weekly management sessions, even his much-needed 11 o'clock break, the witness loads a silver bar tagged with her own name. Tubman glances off to one side, no doubt seeing the same thing, and winces. I'll bring coffee, she says, and sees him struggle for a moment to find a polite way of begging her not to make it herself. From the place on the corner, she adds. Bless you, Tubman agrees. Okay, so the service with a capital S is obviously some sort of all-tending internet. And these two are going to confer about a case. That was really good. I think you would have to agree. That was really good. There's knowing kind of tart humor on every page, on every line, every line of it, and the characters come through really well. I thought so. That's excerpt number 2. Then we'll do excerpt number 3. We'll do this is our last one. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. All right. An orthographic word ahead of time. This is all one page with no paragraph breaks of any kind. He slumps down on the bed, his head crammed full of writhing flesh, blinded by fear flashing from dying eyes, deafened by howls, and the popping of Small Arm's fire. Squilly says, come on, Butchie, you gotta break a few eggs if you want to make a wee lovely omelet. You know that. But the butcher says nothing, only sits massaging his synthetic features, his blue-black hair twined in his pianist's fingers. Squilly's having none of this. What is it we always say, Butcher, when we're feeling a bit queasy? Buzz off, Squilly, Butcher grunts. Say it, Squilly barks. Say it with me, Butch, say it. And then they chant in unison. The professional skills of espionage consist entirely in the exploitation of human weakness. All that has hyphens between the syllables to simulate saying out loud. And when this is done, the butcher finds himself standing by the wardrobe wearing white Calvin Kleins, which was how he'd introduced himself to the greedy little woman in the big ranch house out of South Fork via Chester earlier that day. When she'd the temerity to laugh, the butcher encouraged her hilarity by retrieving from his pocket a folded page he'd torn from a magazine, unfolding and holding it up so she could see Mark Wahlberg, naked except for his Calvin Kleins, hand on his squilly. Ha ha ha, she'd chortled. Don't be ridiculous. That's not ID. When the butcher next spoke, they'd been in the oppressively fitted kitchen, and the dodgy strap was in his hand. How'd you know anyone who is who they say they are? He remarked conversationally. Because they've got a photograph with a name written underneath it? Okay. All right. Very different. That's all one paragraph. It goes on and on. It's not just one paragraph. The conversation is all in line. There are no quotes. There are no indentations. And it's surreal. We don't know who these people are or where they are or what their relationship is to each other. Squilly is two different things here. Both a person with a capital S and the name of a certain body part. And it flows along. It's actually quite nice. What was it? His blue-black hair twined in his pianist fingers. That's very good. So those are our three. And I got to confess, all three were good, I thought. And oddly, I think they went up in quality steadily as they went along. The first one seemed like the most straightforward. Just straight narrative. Again, this is the key to the page 112 tag, is that you're not sure. You're not sure of the broader context, the whole thing. All three were competently written. If I were reading these three in a competitive field, I would want to proceed with each one of them. The first one is Peculiar Ground by Lucy Hughes Hallett, which she won the Costa Award for The Pike. And this is her literary fiction debut. It's an extraordinary historical epic in the spirit of Wolf Hall and Atonement. A great English country house novel. All right, there you go. It's a country house novel, hence the mention of fox hunting. Spanning 3 centuries that explores surprisingly timely themes of immigration and exclusion. Okay, so based on the page that we read, I would certainly read the rest of it. Then the next one, the weird one that seemed quasi-science fiction, is this big thing. It's Gnomon by Nick Harkaway, with the digital shark fin on the cover. And this is by the author of Tiger Man, which is an amazing book that you should all rush right out and read. And this is huge. This is 3 times the size of Tiger Man. So I don't know, and it's a virtuosic new novel, equal parts dark comedy, gripping detective story, and mind-bending philosophical puzzle set in a not-too-distant future in a high-tech surveillance state. Okay, so that's why the service knew how to access the personal schedules of the 2 characters and how to alter the schedules. You notice, thinking back on the excerpt that we heard, they weren't altering their schedules. They were being heard making plans, and then the thing that was hearing them was altering their schedules for them while they both watched. So that's fascinating. And this is a big work of literary science fiction. I hate that combination, but nevertheless, more and more people are doing it. And then the last one, I'm a bit surprised because looking at the book and thinking about the author, only those 2 things, without ever delving inside the covers, my automatic reaction would be that I probably wouldn't like any of it. And it's Phone by Will Self. And yet I liked it most of all. So there you go. Feel free to pull down 3 books and do this yourself. This is enormous fun. And I'll list these books. I guess I won't. No, I don't want you to look ahead. That's all right. We'll just talk about them in the comments field. I am now eager to read the whole of all of these books. So this was a lot of fun. I'll do this again next week. And in the meantime, I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.